Have you ever wondered why a man, no matter how bold his words or how loud his confidence, still carries within him unspoken truths when faced with the woman he truly desires? Beneath the armor of masculinity lies a silence so thick, so forbidden, that even he cannot bring himself to articulate it. This silence is not weakness, but shadow. It is the unacknowledged realm of longing, fear, and vulnerability, where Jung reminds us that the unconscious always speaks, even when the tongue refuses. The first truth is this: a man fears being devoured by the very intensity of his own desire. He may speak of conquest, of wanting, of pursuit, but deep down, desire is a fire that threatens to consume his carefully built ego. To long for a woman is to risk losing himself, and this is the one risk most men cannot openly confess. So instead, he hides behind bravado, behind casual detachment, behind the illusion of control. But she, the intuitive feminine, feels it. She sees the hesitation in his eyes when silence stretches too long. She notices the tremor in his voice, the way his presence lingers like smoke after flame. The second truth is this: he envies her capacity for mystery. A woman who knows her silence, who does not yield her every thought, becomes to him an abyss both frightening and irresistible. He cannot admit this envy, for it would shatter the illusion of superiority that society trains him to wear, but it gnaws at him, quietly, like hunger. To face a woman who does not reveal herself completely is to confront the limits of his own perception, the fragility of his power. And so, rather than confess admiration, he cloaks it in frustration, in dismissive words. Yet secretly, his soul is ensnared, because the feminine mystery awakens his unconscious in ways he cannot rationalize. The third forbidden truth lives in shame. He fears that his deepest needs would make him appear weak. To yearn not just for her body, but for her presence, her gaze, her acceptance, is something he buries under jokes and half-truths. Men are taught that need is weakness, that vulnerability makes them less worthy. Yet Jung would say that what he represses does not vanish. It grows, it twists, it hides within shadow. And so, when he loves a woman with true intensity, he cannot admit how much he longs for her recognition, for the comfort of being truly seen. The shame of needing her becomes the prison of his silence. The fourth truth is darker still. He resents the power she holds over his emotions. Desire makes him fragile. Indifference does not. A man can walk through fire unscathed when he does not care. But the moment he cares, he trembles at the possibility of rejection. He cannot tell her this, for to admit it would expose just how deeply she governs his state of being. He may speak of independence, of control, of freedom, but internally, he is bound by the very strings he pretends do not exist. The feminine who understands this rarely needs to demand. Her silence alone wields the force of 1,000 words. The fifth forbidden truth is the ghost of comparison. He secretly measures himself against the invisible men in her past, against those she may never even mention. He wonders if he is enough, if he is greater, if he is lesser. This silent torment echoes in his dreams, in his doubts, in the way he seeks to impress without saying why. He will never confess it openly, for his pride could not withstand the rawness of that exposure. Yet in Jungian terms, it is his shadow crying out, his ego wrestling with the archetype of the rival, the imagined competitor who reflects back his insecurities. The sixth truth lives in obsession. Once a woman imprints herself upon a man's psyche, she becomes a haunting. He cannot tell her this because to do so would reveal the depth of his surrender. She lingers in the silence of his mornings, in the ache of his solitude, in the pauses between conversations with others. He despises how she lives rent-free in his unconscious, yet he cannot evict her. This forbidden obsession is not something he declares. It is something he carries like a secret weight, visible only to those who look deeply enough to notice the tiredness in his smile. And finally, the seventh truth is the one that terrifies him most. He fears that she does not need him at all. The independent woman, the one whose life does not orbit his presence, reveals the greatest wound of all, that his importance is not absolute. To confess this fear would strip him bare. Yet it is precisely this truth that draws him closer. For the woman who does not need becomes the woman he desires most. She stands untouchable, sovereign in her own being, and by doing so, she awakens in him both longing and despair. These truths, hidden in shadow, unspoken on lips, live quietly in the heart of every man who has ever stood before a woman he truly desires. And if you, listening now, have ever felt the weight of a man's silence, know that silence was never empty. It was overflowing with forbidden truths he could not bear to speak. When a man stands before the woman he cannot forget, he carries a storm within him that no words can contain. Jung taught that the unconscious will always seek expression, whether through dreams, projections, or the silent tension in the body. A man's shoulders may look broad, his face impassive, his voice steady. But beneath the surface, an entire myth plays out. He becomes both the hero and the prisoner of his own desire, torn between the archetype of the conqueror and the trembling boy who fears abandonment. The forbidden truths he hides are not simply secrets about her, they are revelations about himself. To long for a woman forces him to confront what he lacks, and this confrontation is unbearable to the ego. Thus, he shields himself in the performance of strength, while deep inside, he is fragile before her. This fragility is not weakness, but shadow, an aspect of his humanity he has not yet reconciled. And the more he denies it, the more she can feel it lingering in his presence, unspoken but undeniable. It is here that the feminine power becomes dangerous. For the woman who understands, truly understands, does not need to manipulate or coerce. Her mere existence becomes a mirror to his unhealed places. She does not even need to ask. Her silence extracts more confessions than any question ever could. He will feel compelled to prove himself, to display, to mask, to posture, yet simultaneously terrified that she will see through all of it. And indeed, she does. This is why his obsession often turns inward, eating at him in silence. He cannot explain why her absence weighs heavier than her presence. He cannot explain why her withdrawal burns more than any insult. To admit such power would be to surrender his illusion of control. And so he buries it in subtle acts, lingering glances, half-formed compliments, or sudden disappearances. He hopes she will not notice, yet he also hopes desperately that she does. The paradox of desire is that it thrives in tension. Men often believe desire is about conquest, but the truth is more subtle. Desire grows strongest in the presence of distance, mystery, and silence. The woman who chases rarely awakens this storm. The woman who stands apart, sovereign in her being, ignites it without trying. Jung would call this the projection of the anima, the inner feminine that dwells within every man. He projects it onto her, making her the vessel of his own hidden longings. But projection cannot last forever. Eventually, reality demands to be seen. And when the woman remains detached, the man is left confronting not her, but himself. This is why he grows restless, why he oscillates between pursuit and withdrawal. He cannot confess the truth, that what he desires most is not simply her beauty, nor her body, but the feeling of completion her presence seems to offer. It is not lust alone that haunts him. It is the ache of incompleteness. She represents the missing piece, the echo of something his soul recognizes but cannot grasp. And yet, because this truth is too heavy to speak aloud, he clothes it in half-hearted phrases, in flattery, in silence. To you, the woman listening now, this silence may once have felt like rejection. You may have wondered why he spoke so little, why his eyes lingered, but his words betrayed nothing. But what if his silence was not absence, but overflow? What if it was the inability to contain the flood of forbidden truths that threatened to break his carefully guarded image? His silence was not emptiness, it was too much, all at once. Consider how often a man masks longing with irritation, or disguises envy as criticism. His ego cannot bear the exposure of vulnerability, so he turns it into the language of distance. But the feminine soul, attuned to nuance, feels the contradiction. She knows when his dismissal is not truly dismissal. She knows when his detachment is trembling with attachment. She knows because she feels the unspoken weight. This is why women who stand in their own power become unforgettable. Not because they manipulate, not because they scheme, but because they refuse to collapse into his expectations. She who does not yield to his demand for constant validation becomes the woman who reveals his shadow. And in doing so, she awakens a depth of attraction he can neither control nor confess. The most dangerous feminine power, then, is not in what she gives, but in what she withholds. For every word unsaid, every silence maintained, every gaze that remains steady without needing to explain, these are the mirrors that strip a man a soul bare. And though he will never confess it, he is addicted to the mystery, because in her detachment, she touches the deepest truth he hides, that he is not the master of desire, but its servant. The man who stands in the grip of desire often believes he is in control, but in truth, he is ensnared by forces far older than his will. Jung spoke of archetypes, the eternal patterns that move through every human soul. And when a man encounters a woman who awakens his unconscious, he does not see her fully as she is. He sees her as both muse and mirror, both goddess and destroyer. She becomes larger than life, a vessel for the parts of himself he has never dared to confront. And though he may never confess this, the truth is simple. She terrifies him. The terror comes not from her actions, but from her freedom. A woman who does not bend to his rhythm, who does not make herself small to soothe his ego, forces him to face the reality of his own dependence. He realizes that his worth is not absolute, that her love is not guaranteed, that his existence does not define her world. This realization cuts at the deepest wound of masculine pride. For centuries, men have been told they are the sun, and women the orbiting planets. But the modern woman who stands sovereign shatters that illusion. She reveals that he is not the center. He is merely one star among many. This is why so many men cling to possession. Possession feels safer than love. Possession feels like certainty, like control, like grounding. Yet possession is not love. It is fear, disguised as devotion. And he cannot admit this truth, for to do so would expose how fragile his grip truly is. So he turns love into a contract, desire into ownership, longing into expectation. But deep inside, he knows she is never fully his. The feminine spirit cannot be owned, only invited, only chosen. And this forbidden truth gnaws at him more deeply than any rejection. The silence between them becomes the stage where his inner battle rages. When she does not answer, he is forced to hear his own thoughts echo louder. When she does not yield, he is confronted with his own powerlessness. And in these moments, he feels the ancient fear that without her gaze, without her recognition, he is nothing. Men rarely confess this dependence, yet it is written in history, in art, in poetry, in every story of kingdoms lost for the sake of a woman's smile. Even Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, spoke of the fragility of human desire, how easily the mind becomes enslaved by longing. And so he remains silent. He cannot tell her that she is his undoing. He cannot confess that he longs for her approval as much as for her body. He cannot admit that her rejection would collapse him more completely than the judgment of nations. These truths are too dangerous, too humiliating, too raw for his pride to bear. And yet, they leak out in the smallest gestures, the quickened breath, the restless glance, the sudden intensity of attention when she turns her focus elsewhere. To the feminine soul, these cracks are not invisible. She senses them instinctively, for the feminine intuition was built to navigate the unspoken. She knows that what he hides is often louder than what he says. She knows that when his words dismiss, his silence confesses. And she knows that the man who desires her most intensely is the one who trembles most at her absence. This is where her power lies. Not in loudness, not in confrontation, but in quiet sovereignty. The woman who knows her worth does not need to shout, for her very presence unsettles the illusions of men. She does not chase, because she understands the ancient law. What is truly hers will never need to be hunted. She does not beg, because she understands that begging only breeds contempt. Instead, she remains still, rooted in her own self-possession, and it is this stillness that unsettles him most. And yet this story is not about cruelty. It is not about dominating him or mocking his silence. It is about seeing clearly. For the forbidden truths of men are not meant to be weapons. They are mirrors. They reveal how fragile the ego becomes when confronted with true intimacy. They reveal that even in his silence, he is confessing desire, confessing envy, confessing fear. If you have ever wondered why a man grows restless when you withdraw, why he grows louder when you go silent, why he seems to chase hardest when you stand still, it is because your silence threatens to expose the truths he hides. You awaken his shadow without lifting a finger, and though he may never say it, you will feel it. You will see it in the way his gaze lingers, in the way his energy tightens, in the way his presence betrays what his lips deny. The forbidden truths are never spoken, but they are always known. There comes a moment when the weight of these hidden truths becomes unbearable, when the man can no longer contain the tension between his pride and his longing. This is when his behavior begins to betray him. He might grow impatient, oscillating between tenderness and distance. He might offer gifts or grand gestures, not because he is generous, but because he hopes to purchase the security his heart cannot find. Or he may suddenly withdraw altogether, choosing silence as a way to shield himself from the vulnerability of needing her. Each of these actions is not random. It is the shadow struggling to keep its secrets. Jung would say that what is denied does not disappear. It returns, often in distorted form, twisting into behaviors that confuse both him and the woman before him. The more he hides his forbidden truths, the more loudly they echo through his unconscious. He cannot tell her that he envies her freedom, so he criticizes her independence. He cannot confess that he fears losing her, so he pretends he never cared. He cannot reveal that her silence wounds him, so he seeks other distractions, hoping to erase her from memory. Yet, the harder he tries, the deeper her presence carves itself into him. For the woman who witnesses this dance, the temptation may be to chase clarity, to demand words he cannot give. But the wiser path is detachment. To demand what he cannot confess is to strip him of dignity, and in doing so, to create resistance. But to remain still, self-contained, is to mirror his shadow back to him without force. It is then that he feels the weight of his own silence pressing harder than anything you could ever say. Men are not undone by arguments. They are undone by the absence of reaction. The feminine silence, when rooted not in fear, but in power, becomes the most potent catalyst for truth. It forces the man to sit with himself, to wrestle with the very things he has buried. And though he may never admit it, this confrontation changes him. He begins to see that his desire was never only about her body or her beauty. It was about his longing for wholeness, for union with the parts of himself he has disowned. She did not break him. She revealed him to himself. The tragedy, and the gift, is that many men realize this too late. They confess their truths only in absence, only when she has already walked away. They remember the way her silence unsettled them, the way her freedom haunted them, the way her presence stirred something they could not control. They regret not speaking, not choosing, not standing vulnerably in the fire of their own emotions. This regret becomes the ghost that lingers, the memory that replays, the quiet ache that returns in the stillness of night. And once again, he cannot confess it, except perhaps to himself, in the solitude of his own thoughts. For the woman, there is a choice. She can allow his silence to dictate her worth, or she can rise into her own sovereignty, recognizing that his unspoken truths are not hers to carry. His fear of losing her, his envy of her mystery, his longing for her recognition. These are his burdens, not hers. She is not responsible for healing the shadow he refuses to face. She is only responsible for standing in her own truth, her own dignity, her own radiant presence. This is the essence of feminine power. Not to dominate the man, not to expose him cruelly, but to remain whole in the presence of his fragmentation. To let his silence echo without trying to fill it. To let his forbidden truths remain his own until he is strong enough to face them. And in doing so, she reclaims the most vital treasure of all, her detachment from the need for his validation. When a woman no longer seeks to draw confessions from a man, she steps into the realm of self-possession. His silence no longer wounds her, it reveals him. His distance no longer shakes her, it defines him. She no longer waits for him to admit what he cannot say, for she has already seen it in his eyes. And it is in this seeing, without needing, that she becomes untouchable. The men who once thought they had power over her realized too late that the opposite was true. It was her presence, her restraint, her mystery that commanded the entire dynamic. And though he may never confess it, she will know. She will see it in his restless pursuit, in his regret, in his lingering obsession. For the woman who stands sovereign does not beg, does not plead, does not chase. She simply exists. And in her existence, she awakens the forbidden truths no man dares to speak. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.